She knew the envelope would contain bad news, but nothing could have prepared her for what came next. Callie Monroe stared at the red-stamped notice in her trembling hands, her green eyes scanning the words, "Final notice," for the third time. The small apartment in downtown Denver felt even smaller as the weight of her reality pressed down on her shoulders. 24 years old, drowning in student loans, credit card debt, and now this. An eviction notice giving her 30 days to pay $4,200 or lose the only home she'd known since leaving Colorado Springs. She bit the corner of her thumbnail, a nervous habit she'd carried since childhood, and let her long black hair fall like a curtain around her face. The silence was broken only by the hum of her ancient refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic below. Her phone buzzed with a text from Cassidy Wells, her best friend and the only person who knew just how bad things had gotten. "Coffee later. I have something to tell you." Callie set the notice on her small kitchen table, next to a stack of other bills she couldn't afford to pay. She pulled out her earbuds and scrolled to her comfort playlist. Taylor Swift's All Too Well filled her ears as she tried to push down the panic rising in her chest. Music had always been her escape, but today even her favorite songs couldn't quiet the storm in her mind. An hour later, she sat across from Cassidy at their usual spot, a small cafe called Grounds for Hope on Colfax Avenue. Cassidy's blonde hair was pulled back with colorful bobby pins, her nurse scrub still on from her shift at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital. Her green eyes sparkled with an energy that Callie envied. "You look terrible," Cassidy said bluntly, stirring sugar into her latte. "When's the last time you slept?" "Thanks for the pep talk." Callie managed a weak smile, wrapping her hands around her black coffee, the cheapest thing on the menu. "I got the eviction notice today." Cassidy's face fell. "Cal, why didn't you tell me it was that bad?" "I could've. You're already helping me too much." Callie shook her head. "I can't keep borrowing money from you. You're saving for nursing school." "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about." Cassidy leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I heard something at work today. Something unusual." Callie raised an eyebrow. "Unusual how?" "One of the doctors mentioned a patient. Well, not really a patient. More like a consultant." Cassidy glanced around nervously. "Look, this is going to sound crazy, but there's this guy, some big-shot CEO, and he's looking for someone to help him with a very specific situation. Cassidy, if you're about to suggest I become someone's sugar baby, it's not like that." Cassidy's cheeks flushed pink. "It's more like a business arrangement, a really well-paying business arrangement." Callie's heart began to race, but not from hope, from dread. "What kind of business arrangement?" "He needs someone to carry his child. Through artificial insemination. It's completely medical, completely professional. And Cal, he's offering enough money to change someone's life completely." The coffee shop seemed to spin around Callie. She gripped her cup tighter, feeling the ceramic warm against her palms. "You're talking about surrogacy. I'm talking about solving all your problems in one contract." Cassidy reached across the table and took her hand. "Look, I know it sounds intense, but this guy, his name is Nolan Ashford. He's legitimate. He runs some big investment firm, an old money family. The doctor said he needs an heir for some inheritance thing, but he doesn't want the complications of a relationship." Callie pulled her hand away, standing up abruptly. "I can't believe you're suggesting this. Where are you going to go when they evict you?" Cassidy's voice was gentle but firm. "What are you going to do when your credit is so destroyed you can't even get a job at Target?" The truth hit Callie like a physical blow. She sat back down, her legs suddenly weak. "How much money?" "Enough to pay off everything. Your student loans, credit cards, the car repair, everything. Plus enough left over to start fresh wherever you want." Callie stared out the window at the busy street, watching people hurry past with their seemingly perfect lives. A businessman in an expensive suit walked by, talking on his phone, completely oblivious to the young woman inside the cafe whose life was falling apart. "There's a catch, isn't there?" she whispered. "He wants to meet you first. Some kind of interview process. You'd have to stay at his house for a month. Let him get to know you before making the final decision." Cassidy squeezed her hand again. "Cal, I've seen his picture. He's handsome, successful, and according to Dr. Martinez, he's a good guy. This could be your way out." Callie closed her eyes, trying to imagine a life without the constant weight of debt, without the fear of losing everything she'd worked so hard for. But the thought of carrying a stranger's child, of letting someone she didn't know decide if she was worthy enough to solve his problems. What if he's a creep? What if this is all some elaborate scam? Then you walk away. But Cal, what if it's not? What if this is the universe giving you exactly what you need, when you need it most? Callie opened her eyes and looked at her best friend, the one person who had never judged her, never made her feel small or broken. Cassidy's freckled face was full of hope and determination. I need to think about it, Callie said finally. Of course, but don't think too long. The doctor said he's meeting with candidates next week. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling between them. Callie twirled a strand of her black hair around her finger, a gesture she made when her mind was racing. Outside, the Denver skyline stretched toward the mountains, beautiful and indifferent to the struggles of one young woman trying to survive. Cassidy? Callie's voice was barely audible. Yeah? If I did this, if I actually went through with something like this, what kind of person would that make me? Cassidy reached across the table one more time, her green eyes serious and warm. Doris would make you someone who's brave enough to take control of her life, and even when she's scared. As they left the cafe, Callie's phone buzzed with another text. This time, it wasn't from Cassidy. It was from an unknown number. Ms. Monroe, I understand you might be interested in discussing a business proposition. I'd like to meet with you tomorrow at 2 p.m. The address is attached. This could be the beginning of something that changes both our lives. Callie stared at the message, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She looked up at Cassidy, who was reading over her shoulder. I didn't give him your number, Cassidy said quickly. I swear. But as Callie looked at the expensive address attached to the message, a location in Cherry Creek, Denver's most affluent neighborhood, she realized that this Nolan Ashford was clearly a man who got what he wanted. And apparently, what he wanted was her. Some meetings change everything, even when you think you're prepared for anything. Callie stood in front of the towering glass building on East First Avenue, her reflection staring back at her from the pristine windows. She'd chosen her best outfit, a simple navy dress she'd bought for job interviews, paired with her only pair of heels that weren't scuffed beyond repair. Her long black hair was pulled into a neat bun, though rebellious strands kept escaping to frame her face. The lobby was all marble and chrome, the kind of place where her monthly rent wouldn't even cover the cost of the fresh orchids displayed on every table. She approached the reception desk, her heart hammering against her ribs. I'm here to see Nolan Ashford, she said to the perfectly polished receptionist. Callie Monroe, penthouse level. He's expecting you. The elevator ride felt eternal. Callie caught glimpses of herself in the mirrored walls, pale skin, green eyes wide with nervous energy, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She'd barely slept the night before, alternating between rehearsing what she'd say and imagining all the ways this could go wrong. The elevator doors opened directly into an office that looked more like a sophisticated living room. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the Rocky Mountains, and everything was decorated in shades of charcoal gray and cream. Jazz music played softly from hidden speakers, something instrumental and soothing. Miss Monroe, the voice came from behind her, deep and measured. Callie turned around and felt her breath catch in her throat. Nolan James Ashford was nothing like she'd imagined. Yes, Cassidy had mentioned he was handsome, but the word seemed inadequate now. He stood at least 6'2", with perfectly tailored charcoal slacks and a white dress shirt that looked like it cost more than her car payment. His light brown hair was styled with subtle precision, and when he stepped closer, she noticed his eyes, the same intense green as her own, but colder, more calculating. Thank you for coming, he said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, confident, and she noticed he wore a simple but expensive watch. Please, have a seat. He gestured to a leather chair facing his desk, and Callie settled into it, trying not to fidget. Nolan moved with the kind of controlled grace that suggested he was used to being in command of every situation. He poured himself a glass of water from a crystal pitcher, then offered her the same. I imagine you have questions, he said, sitting across from her. His posture was perfect, his hands folded calmly on the desk. I prefer directness, so let me start with the most important facts. Callie nodded, not trusting her voice yet. I need an heir to fulfill the terms of my grandfather's will. The inheritance includes not just money, but control of the family foundation and several business interests that employ over 3,000 people. His tone was matter of fact, as if he were discussing the weather. I don't have time for traditional relationships, nor do I want the complications they bring. So you decided to hire someone instead, Callie said quietly, finding her voice. I decided to find a mutually beneficial arrangement. He leaned back slightly, studying her face. Your friend Dr. Wells mentioned you're in financial difficulty. Heat flooded Callie's cheeks. She shouldn't have. She cares about you. That's admirable. Nolan's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Financial stress can be devastating. I understand you're facing eviction. Callie wanted to disappear into the expensive leather chair. How much do you know about me? Enough to know that you graduated magna cum laude with a degree in literature, that you've been working 3 part-time jobs to stay afloat, and that despite your circumstances, you've never missed a payment to your elderly landlady until recently. He paused, and something that might have been respect flickered in his green eyes. You could have declared bankruptcy 2 years ago and started fresh, but you didn't. Those debts are my responsibility, she said, lifting her chin. I don't run from what I owe, which is exactly why you're sitting here. Nolan stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. I don't need someone who takes shortcuts, Ms. Monroe. I need someone with integrity. The afternoon sun caught the light brown highlights in his hair, and Callie found herself studying the strong line of his shoulders, the way he held himself with such certainty. There was something almost lonely about his silhouette against that vast window. What exactly would this arrangement involve? She asked. He turned back to face her. First, a month-long trial period. You'd stay at my home in Cherry Creek and we'd get to know each other. I need to be certain you're someone I can trust with something this important. And if you decide I'm trustworthy, artificial insemination through a reputable clinic, you'd continue to live in my home during the pregnancy for monitoring and medical care. In return, all your debts would be paid immediately, and you'd receive additional compensation. Callie's heart raced. It sounded too good to be true, which in her experience meant it probably was. What's the catch? For the first time, Nolan's composure seemed to crack slightly. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so unexpectedly human it caught her off guard. The catch is that this has to remain completely confidential. My family, my business associates, the media, no one can know about the arrangement. As far as the world is concerned, any child would be the result of a private relationship. You mean I'd have to pretend to be your girlfriend? In public, yes. The story would be that we met, fell in love, and decided to start a family. He moved closer to his desk, his fingers drumming once against the wood, another small crack in his perfect facade. I know it's complicated. Callie stood up, needing to pace. She walked to the window, looking out at the city spread below them. From this height, everything looked small and manageable, and after the baby is born, you'd be free to go wherever you wanted, with enough money to build whatever life you chose. His voice was closer now. He'd moved to stand a few feet behind her. The child would stay with me. The words hit her like ice water. You want me to give up the baby? That was always the arrangement, Mrs. Monroe. I thought that was clear. Callie turned to face him, and for a moment they stood there in the golden afternoon light. Two strangers considering a bargain that would change both their lives forever. He was close enough that she could see the tiny lines around his eyes, the slight tension in his jaw that suggested this conversation wasn't as easy for him as he pretended. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course, but I should mention that I'm interviewing other candidates. If you're interested, I'll need an answer by Friday. The business-like tone was back, but Callie caught something else in his expression, a flicker of what might have been hope, or maybe just impatience. There's one more thing, she said as he walked her to the elevator. If I agreed to this trial period, what would that be like? Living in your house, I mean. Nolan pressed the elevator button, and they waited in silence for a moment. When the doors opened, he held them for her, but didn't step inside. I'm not home very much, he said. I work long hours, travel frequently. You'd have your privacy, your own space. It wouldn't be intrusive. Something about the way he said it made Callie think he was trying to convince himself as much as her. As the elevator doors began to close, she pressed the button to hold them open. Mr. Ashford, why me? You could probably find hundreds of women who'd want this opportunity. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he looked directly into her eyes, and she saw something raw and unguarded there. Because you're the first person I've met who seems more afraid of owing something than of having nothing. The elevator doors closed, and Callie was left staring at her reflection, his words echoing in her mind. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, toward her old life of overdue bills and sleepless nights, She realized something had shifted. She was no longer just considering his offer. She was already imagining what it would feel like to say yes. Sometimes the scariest decisions are the ones that feel like coming home. Callie sat on her fire escape at midnight, legs dangling through the metal railings, watching the sparse traffic move through the streets below. The eviction notice lay crumpled on her kitchen table inside by, and her phone showed 17 missed calls from debt collectors. She'd turned the ringer off hours ago, unable to bear another automated voice reminding her of everything she couldn't afford. The mountain air was crisp against her face, carrying the scent of late autumn and distant snow. She pulled her oversized cardigan tighter around her shoulders and scrolled through her playlist, landing on Norah Jones' "Come Away With Me." The soft melody filled her earbuds as she tried to imagine what her life might look like in a year. Option 1. Homeless, credit destroyed, working at whatever job would hire someone with her financial history. Maybe she could move back to Colorado Springs, back to the small town where everyone knew her as the scholarship girl who tried so hard to make something of herself. Option 2. Nolan Ashford's offer, a year of pretending, of carrying a child she'd never raise, of living in a world that wasn't hers. But at the end of it, freedom, real freedom. Her phone buzzed with a text from Cassidy. "Coffee tomorrow. Need to talk." Callie typed back, "Can't afford coffee anymore. Rain check." The response came immediately. "My treat, always. Meet me at 9. The next morning, Callie found Cassidy already waiting at their usual table, 2 steaming cups in front of her. Her blonde hair was loose today, falling in soft waves over her nurse scrubs, and her green eyes held that determined look Callie knew so well. "You look like you didn't sleep," Cassidy said, pushing the larger coffee toward her. "So I've been thinking." Callie wrapped her hands around the warm cup, grateful for the heat, about everything. And I think I'm going to do it." The words came out in a rush, as if saying them quickly would make them easier. "I'm going to call him today." Cassidy's face lit up, but then quickly turned serious. "Cal, are you sure? This isn't something you can undo. Look around us." Callie gestured to the small cafe, to the other customers hunched over their laptops, probably looking for jobs or trying to make ends meet. "What do I have to undo? I'm drowning, Cass. This is a life preserver, but carrying someone's baby, giving it up, it's not someone, it's him." Callie surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. "I know it sounds crazy, but when I met him yesterday, there was something. I can't explain it. He's not what I expected." Cassidy leaned forward, her freckled nose wrinkling with concern. "What do you mean? I thought he'd be this cold, entitled rich guy who saw me as a commodity. But he wasn't. He was." Callie paused, searching for the right words. "Lonely, maybe. And when he looked at me, really looked at me, it felt like he saw something worthwhile. Callie Monroe, please tell me you're not falling for your potential baby daddy before you've even signed a contract." Heat flooded Callie's cheeks. "It's not like that. It's just, when's the last time someone saw me as more than my problems? When's the last time someone thought I was worth investing in?" They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the morning crowd rush past the windows. Office workers with their perfectly pressed clothes and confident strides, students with backpacks and dreams, families with strollers and comfortable chaos. "There's something else," Callie said quietly. "He said I could stay in his house for a month first, to see if we're compatible. Compatible for baby making or compatible for pretending to be in love? Both, I think." Callie twisted a strand of her black hair around her finger. What if this month turns into something real?" Cassidy reached across the table and grabbed her hand. "Honey, that's a really dangerous way to think about this. He's offering you a business transaction. Don't romanticize it into something it's not." But as Callie walked home from the cafe, Cassidy's warning felt distant and abstract. What felt real was the memory of Nolan's green eyes studying her face, the way his perfectly controlled demeanor had cracked just enough to show her something human underneath. She climbed the 3 flights to her small apartment, dodging the loose board on the second landing that Mrs. Patterson kept promising to fix. Inside, the eviction notice seemed to mock her from the kitchen table, but for the first time in months, it didn't make her stomach clench with panic. She picked up her phone and dialed the number from yesterday's text. "Ashford Industries, how may I help you? This is Callie Monroe. I'd like to speak with Nolan Ashford, please. One moment." The hold music was classical, something elegant and sophisticated that made her feel like she was calling a museum. Then his voice came on the line, crisp and professional. Ms. Monroe? I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon. I've made my decision. Callie closed her eyes, took a deep breath. I'd like to accept your offer. The trial period. There was a pause so long she wondered if the call had dropped. Then, are you certain? Once we begin this process, there's no going back. I'm certain. And surprisingly, she was. And when would you want me to start? Tomorrow, if you're able. I'll send a car to collect you and your things at noon. A car? Callie looked around her tiny apartment. The second-hand furniture, the stack of library books, the single suitcase that held most of her clothes. I don't have much to pack. Bring whatever makes you comfortable. The house has everything else you'll need. After they hung up, Callie sat on her small couch and tried to process what she'd just committed to. Tomorrow she'd be living in a mansion with a man she'd met once, pretending to consider having his baby. It sounded like the plot of a romance novel, except this was her life. She spent the rest of the day packing her few belongings and trying to explain to Mrs. Patterson that she'd be away for a while. Her elderly landlady, a sweet woman with silver hair and knowing eyes, had simply nodded and said, "Sometimes life gives us exactly what we need, dear, even when it's not what we expected." That evening, Callie called her parents in Colorado Springs. She told them she'd gotten a job as a live-in caretaker for a wealthy family. Not entirely a lie, she reasoned. Her mother was thrilled that she'd finally found steady work, and her father reminded her to be careful in the big city. As she hung up, Callie realized this might be the last night she spent in this apartment as the person she'd always been. Broke, struggling, uncertain about everything. Tomorrow she'd wake up in a different world, with a different life, pretending to be someone worthy of Nolan Ashford's attention. She pulled out her phone and sent one last text to Cassidy. "Car comes at noon tomorrow. Wish me luck." The response came immediately. "You don't need luck, you need courage, and you've always had plenty of that." Callie set her phone aside and walked to her small window, looking out at the Denver skyline glittering in the distance. Somewhere out there, Nolan Ashford was probably in his penthouse office, working late into the night, methodically planning their arrangement like it was just another business deal. But as she traced patterns in the condensation on the glass, Callie couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would change both their lives in ways neither of them expected. What she didn't know was that Nolan was standing at his own window at that very moment, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his carefully controlled life. She thought she was prepared for luxury, but she wasn't prepared for him. The black sedan that arrived at noon was nothing like the taxi Callie had imagined. The driver, a kind-faced man in his 50s named Thomas, helped her load her single suitcase and worn duffel bag into the pristine trunk, treating her belongings with the same care he'd show priceless artifacts. "First time to Cherry Creek?" he asked as they pulled away from her apartment building. "First time to anywhere like this," Callie admitted, watching her old neighborhood disappear in the side mirror. As they drove through Denver's most exclusive area, Callie pressed her face to the window like a child. The houses grew larger and more elaborate with each block, sprawling estates with perfectly manicured lawns, iron gates, and architecture that looked like it belonged in European magazines rather than Colorado. "Here we are, miss," Thomas said, turning through a set of elegant stone pillars. Callie's breath caught in her throat. The house, mansion really, rose before them like something from a fairy tale. 3 stories of warm stone and tall windows, with ivy climbing artfully up one side and a circular driveway that could have accommodated a small wedding. Mature oak trees framed the property, their autumn leaves creating a carpet of gold and crimson. "This is where he lives," she whispered. "Mr. Ashford has excellent taste," Thomas said with obvious pride. "I've been working for the family for 15 years. He's a good man, miss. Private, but good." The front door opened before they'd even stopped, and Nolan appeared on the stone steps. He'd traded his business suit for dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater that made his light brown hair look golden in the afternoon sun. Somehow, this casual version of him was even more intimidating than the CEO she'd met yesterday. "Ms. Monroe." He approached the car with measured steps. Welcome, Callie," she said, accepting his offered hand as she stepped out. "And thank you. This is incredible." His fingers were warm and steady, and he held her hand just a moment longer than necessary. "I hope you'll be comfortable here." Thomas appeared with her luggage, and Callie felt a flush of embarrassment at how shabby her belongings looked against the elegant backdrop, but Nolan seemed not to notice. leading her up the wide stone steps to the front door. The interior took her breath away. The foyer soared 2 stories high, with a chandelier that looked like captured starlight and a staircase that curved gracefully to the 2nd floor. Everything was decorated in sophisticated neutrals: cream, soft gray, touches of deep blue, creating an atmosphere that was luxurious, but somehow still warm. "Right, I'll show you to your room," Nolan said, and Callie followed him up the stairs, her fingertips trailing along the smooth wooden banister. The guest suite was larger than her entire apartment had been. French doors opened onto a private balcony overlooking gardens that looked professionally maintained, and the bathroom featured a clawfoot tub that practically begged for long, relaxing soaks. But what caught her attention was the small sitting area by the window, complete with a comfortable reading chair and good lighting. "I noticed you had library books in your apartment," Nolan said, following her gaze. "I thought you might like somewhere quiet to read." The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught her off guard. "How did you know about the library books?" "I'm observant." He moved to the French doors, adjusting them so the afternoon breeze could flow through. "I also had my assistant stock the bookshelf with some recent releases. Literary fiction, mostly." Callie walked to the built-in bookshelf and ran her fingers along the spines. Brand new hardcovers, the kind she could never afford but always coveted in bookstores. "You didn't have to do this. I want you to feel at home here." His voice was softer than she'd heard it before. "This arrangement only works if you're comfortable." She turned to face him, studying his profile as he looked out at the gardens. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why do you live in this big house all by yourself?" Something flickered across his features. Surprise? Maybe. Or discomfort. "I inherited it from my grandfather. It seemed impractical to sell." "That's not really an answer." He turned to meet her gaze, and for a moment she saw that crack in his composure again. "I suppose I never saw the point in making it smaller when I could simply avoid the empty rooms." The honesty in his admission made her chest tighten. "That sounds lonely." "I stay busy." He straightened his shoulders, the wall going back up. "Speaking of which, I should let you get settled. Dinner is at 7:00 if you'd like to join me. Nothing formal. I usually eat in the kitchen." After he left, Callie unpacked her few belongings, hanging her simple clothes in a walk-in closet that could have housed a small family. She changed into her most comfortable jeans and a soft purple sweater, then spent an hour exploring the suite and trying to convince herself this was real. At 7 o'clock, she made her way downstairs, following the sound of soft jazz music and the scent of something delicious cooking. The kitchen was a chef's dream, all granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, but somehow still felt homey. Nolan stood at the stove, stirring something in a heavy pan, and he'd opened a bottle of red wine that sat breathing on the counter. "You cook?" she asked, surprised. "I find it relaxing." He glanced up from the pan. "I hope you like risotto. I should have asked about dietary restrictions." "I like everything. I'm not picky when you've eaten ramen for 6 months straight." He poured wine into 2 glasses, offering her one. "To new beginnings." They clinked glasses, and Callie took a sip of wine that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget. It was smooth and rich, warming her from the inside out. "Can I help with anything?" she asked. "You can tell me about yourself. The real version, not the interview version." Callie perched on one of the bar stools at the kitchen island, watching him work. His movements were precise and confident, like everything else about him. "What do you want to know?" "What made you choose literature as a major?" "It's not exactly the most practical degree. My high school English teacher told me I had a gift for understanding stories. She said literature majors learn to see the truth in complicated situations." Callie swirled the wine in her glass. Of course, she forgot to mention that gift doesn't pay the bills. "But you don't regret it?" It wasn't a question, and she realized he was right. "No, I don't. Even if it led me here. Even if it led you here," he repeated quietly, and she couldn't tell if he meant it as a good thing or bad thing. They ate at the kitchen island rather than the formal dining room, and Callie was surprised by how easy the conversation became. Nolan was intelligent and well-read, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard. He asked thoughtful questions about her childhood in Colorado Springs, her parents' small-town diner, her dreams of writing someday. "What about you?" she asked as they finished eating. "And what's it like growing up in a family like yours?" His fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Structured, predictable, every decision made with the family legacy in mind." "That sounds suffocating." I thought it was normal until I went to college and met people who chose their majors based on passion instead of family expectations. He set down his fork, studying her face. What would you have done differently if money hadn't been an issue? I would have taken more creative writing classes. Maybe tried to publish something. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. It sounds silly. It doesn't sound silly at all. His green eyes were serious, intent. What kind of stories do you want to tell? Stories about people like me. People who don't fit into neat categories, who make difficult choices, who find love in unexpected places. She stopped, realizing how personal she'd just gotten. Sorry, you probably don't want to hear about my writing dreams. I asked because I wanted to hear about them. He reached across the small space between them and touched her hand briefly. Don't apologize for having dreams, Callie. Most people aren't brave enough to admit what they really want. The touch was light, casual, but it sent electricity up her arm. When he pulled his hand away, she felt its absence like a physical loss. I should probably head upstairs, she said, suddenly aware of how intimate this felt, sharing wine and stories in his beautiful kitchen, the soft lighting making everything feel warm and possible. Of course, breakfast is usually around 8 on if you're interested. I make decent coffee. As she reached the kitchen doorway, she turned back. Nolan? Yes, thank you. For the books, for dinner, for making this less awkward than it could have been. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face. Sweet dreams, Callie. Walking up the elegant staircase to her beautiful room, Callie realized something that should have terrified her, but somehow didn't. This didn't feel like a business arrangement anymore. It felt like the beginning of something that could break both their hearts. Some mornings change everything, especially when you find him dancing in the kitchen. Callie woke to the sound of rain against her windows and something else. Music drifting up from downstairs. She checked her phone. 7:43 a.m. Through the French doors, the gardens looked mystical in the gray morning light, droplets clinging to every surface like tiny diamonds. She'd slept better than she had in months, wrapped in sheets that felt like silk and surrounded by a quiet that was foreign after years of city noise. But now, lying in the enormous bed, the reality of her situation hit her again. She was living in a stranger's house, pretending to consider having his baby, and last night she'd felt more connected to another human being than she had in years. The music grew louder as she made her way downstairs, something bluesy and soulful that made her want to move her hips. She followed the sound to the kitchen and stopped in the doorway, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Nolan was cooking again, but this time he was moving to the rhythm, his shoulders swaying as he flipped what looked like French toast. He wore dark gray joggers and a white t-shirt that clung to his shoulders, and his hair was mussed from sleep. This version of him, relaxed, unguarded, almost playful, was so different from the controlled CEO she'd met that she wondered if she was dreaming. "Good morning," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned, and she caught a flash of embarrassment before his smile took over. "I didn't hear you come down. I hope the music wasn't too loud." "I liked it." "What is it?" "Billie Holiday. What a Little Moonlight Can Do." He reached over to lower the volume. "I have a weakness for jazz vocals in the morning. Don't turn it down on my account." Callie moved into the kitchen, drawn by the smell of cinnamon and vanilla. "That smells incredible. Brioche French toast. I may have gone overboard." He gestured to the counter, where he'd laid out fresh strawberries, real maple syrup, and what looked like homemade whipped cream. "I wasn't sure what you liked." "I like all of this." She accepted the cup of coffee he offered, perfectly prepared with just a touch of cream. How did you know how I take my coffee?" "You ordered it the same way both times at the cafe yesterday." The fact that he'd noticed such a small detail made something flutter in her stomach. "You're very observant." Occupational hazard. He plated the French toast with the kind of precision that suggested he'd done this before. "I spend my days analyzing details that other people miss." They ate at the kitchen island again, and Callie found herself watching the way the morning light caught the gold flecks in his green eyes, the way he cut his food into neat pieces before eating, the way he seemed more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said, surprising herself with her boldness. Seems fair, considering our arrangement. Last night you said you thought loneliness was normal until college. What changed?" Nolan was quiet for a long moment, his fork suspended over his plate. "I had a roommate freshman year, Marcus. He came from a family of 7 kids, and they called him every Sunday to catch up on everything. Homework, friends, what he'd had for dinner. He smiled at the memory. I thought it was invasive at first. Then I realized I was jealous. What happened to Marcus? He's a pediatrician in Portland now. Married his college girlfriend. Has 3 kids of his own. Nolan's expression grew distant. We exchanged Christmas cards. The wistfulness in his voice made Callie's chest ache. You could have that too, you know. The family. The Sunday phone calls. I tried once. The admission was so quiet she almost missed it. It didn't work out. Before she could ask more, his phone buzzed with what was clearly a work emergency. He apologized and stepped away to take the call, his voice immediately shifting into CEO mode. Callie cleaned up their breakfast dishes, listening to him discuss market projections and board meetings, watching him pace by the windows as the rain continued to fall. When he hung up, he looked almost surprised to find her still there. Sorry about that. I have to go into the office for a few hours. It's fine. I brought books. Actually, he hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Would you like to come with me? I mean, if you're bored here, you could explore downtown, or there's a bookstore cafe near my office that you might like. The invitation felt significant somehow, like he was offering her a glimpse into his real life, rather than just the controlled version he'd shown her so far. I'd like that, she said. An hour later, they were driving through downtown Denver in his sleek silver car, classical music playing softly, while rain dotted the windshield. Callie watched the city wake up around them, people hurrying under umbrellas, coffee shops glowing warm and inviting, the mountains barely visible through the gray clouds. There's something I should probably tell you, Nolan said as they stopped at a red light. About the public aspect of our arrangement. What about it? My ex-fiancée, Catherine, lives in Denver. We move in similar social circles, so there's a chance we'll run into her at some point. His hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. She can be difficult. Difficult how? She has strong opinions about my personal life, especially when it involves other women. The light turned green, and he accelerated smoothly. I wanted you to be prepared, in case she says something unpleasant. How long were you engaged? 2 years. We broke up 8 months ago. He glanced at her briefly. It was mutual, but she's had trouble accepting it. Callie processed this information, trying to ignore the unexpected stab of something that felt like jealousy. What was she like? Smart, ambitious, from the right family. His tone was carefully neutral. At everything my parents wanted for me, but not what you wanted. I thought it was. Until I realized that caring about someone and loving them aren't the same thing. They pulled up in front of a gleaming office building, and Nolan turned to face her fully. The bookstore is 3 blocks that way, he pointed. Tattered cover. Tell them you're with me, and they'll take good care of you. How long will you be? 2 hours at most. Unless you get tired of waiting. I won't. The certainty in her voice surprised them both. I'll wait. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes that made her stomach flip. Callie. Yeah, thank you. For being here. For making this feel less like a business transaction. After he disappeared into the building, Callie walked to the bookstore through the gentle rain, her mind replaying their conversation. She was learning things about Nolan that didn't fit with her initial impression. His loneliness, his failed engagement, the way he seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and dreams. The bookstore was everything she'd hoped for and more. 3 stories of books with cozy reading nooks and the kind of cafe that served literature with their lattes. She found a quiet corner and tried to read, but her thoughts kept drifting to the man in the office building 3 blocks away. When her phone buzzed with a text, her heart jumped. How's the bookstore? Found anything good? She smiled, typing back, several somethings. How's your meeting? Boring. Thinking about brioche French toast and Billie Holiday. And there was a long pause before his response came. And the way you smiled this morning when you thought I wasn't looking. Callie stared at the message, her pulse racing. This was dangerous territory. Flirtation, intimacy, the kind of connection that made smart women do foolish things. But as she typed her response, she realized she was already too far gone to care about the danger. I'm always smiling when you're not looking. His reply came instantly. Why only when I'm not looking? And with that simple question, Callie knew their carefully controlled arrangement had just shifted into something far more complicated. Some conversations happen in whispers, and some in the space between heartbeats. The rain had turned into a proper storm by evening, with thunder rolling across the mountains and lightning illuminating the windows of Nolan's study. Callie found him there when she came downstairs around 8, sitting behind his mahogany desk with papers scattered around him and his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. "Working late again?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, and she saw exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. "Market volatility. Some of our international investments need attention. Have you eaten?" "I had something earlier," but the way he said it suggested he'd forgotten about food entirely. Callie stepped into the study, noting the empty coffee cup and the way his hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it. "That's not an answer." "Callie, Nolan." She moved closer to his desk, and something in her tone made him stop protesting. "When's the last time you had a real meal?" He leaned back in his leather chair, studying her face. "Are you taking care of me? Someone should." The words came out more tender than she'd intended, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I mean, you made me breakfast. It's only fair." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude. "You don't have to do that." "I want to." And she realized, with startling clarity, that she did. "What sounds good?" 20 minutes later, they were in the kitchen together, Callie making grilled cheese sandwiches while Nolan opened a bottle of wine. The storm raged outside, but inside felt warm and intimate, filled with the sizzle of butter in the pan and the soft jazz he'd put on again. "I used to make these for my dad," Callie said, flipping the sandwiches carefully. "He'd work double shifts at the diner, come home exhausted, and I'd have grilled cheese and tomato soup waiting." "How old were you?" 12, maybe 13. Mom worked evenings at the hospital, so it was usually just me and Dad for dinner. She plated the sandwiches, cutting them diagonally the way her father liked. He'd tell me about the customers, the drama at the diner, ask me about school. Best conversations of my day. Nolan accepted the plate she offered, their fingers brushing briefly. "He sounds like a good father." "He is. They both are. They don't understand why I left Colorado Springs, why I needed more than what they had." She settled onto the stool across from him. "Do your parents understand you?" "My parents understand what I represent to the family legacy. I'm not sure they know who I actually am." He took a bite of the sandwich, and his eyes widened slightly. "This is perfect. Secret ingredient, which is a tiny bit of mayonnaise on the outside before grilling, makes it golden and crispy." She smiled at his expression. "My dad's trick." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the thunder and the rain against the windows. Callie found herself studying Nolan's hands. Long fingers, neat nails, a small scar on his left knuckle that she wanted to ask about. "Callie?" His voice was quieter than usual. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course. This morning, when you asked why I wasn't looking, the truth is I am looking. I've been looking since the moment you walked into my office." He set down his sandwich, his green eyes serious. "That's not part of our arrangement." Her heart started beating faster. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm attracted to you. More than attracted." He ran a hand through his hair, messing it up further. "It means this arrangement is getting complicated in ways I didn't anticipate." "Complicated how?" Instead of answering, he stood and moved around the kitchen island until he was standing in front of her stool, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the flecks of gold in his eyes, feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Complicated like this," he said softly, reaching up to tuck a strand of her long black hair behind her ear. The touch was gentle, almost reverent, but it sent electricity through her entire body. She felt herself leaning into his hand without conscious thought. "Nolan, I know this isn't what we agreed to." His thumb traced along her cheekbone. "But I can't pretend I don't feel it." "Feel what?" "Like you belong here. Like this house has been waiting for you." His other hand came up to frame her face. "Like I've been waiting for you." The words hung between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Callie could feel herself trembling, but not from fear, from want, from the intensity of his gaze, from the way he was looking at her like she was something precious. "This could ruin everything," she whispered. "I know. We barely know each other. I know." His forehead touched hers, and she could feel his breath against her lips. "Tell me to stop, Callie. Tell me this is a mistake." But she couldn't, because sitting here in his beautiful kitchen, with thunder rolling overhead and his hands cradling her face like she was made of spun glass, this felt like the most right thing that had ever happened to her. "I can't," she breathed, and then he was kissing her. It started soft, tentative, a question more than a statement. But when she kissed him back, when her hands fisted in his shirt to pull him closer, Something ignited between them. His mouth moved against hers with growing urgency, and she felt herself dissolving, melting into him like she was coming home to a place she'd never known she was looking for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nolan rested his forehead against hers again. God, Callie, I know. Her voice was shaky, breathless. I know. This changes everything. Does it? She looked up at him, seeing her own confusion and desire reflected in his eyes. Or does it just make everything more honest? He stepped back slightly but kept his hands on her face. What do you mean? I mean, maybe we've been pretending this was just business when we both knew it was something else. She covered his hands with hers. Maybe we've been lying to ourselves from the beginning. And if we have, then we figure out what comes next. She managed a small smile. Together, the storm outside seemed to be moving closer, thunder crashing almost directly overhead. But inside, in the warm circle of light from the kitchen, Callie felt safer than she had in years. I should probably go upstairs, she said, though she made no move to leave his touch. Probably, but his thumbs were still stroking her cheeks and in his eyes were dark with want. This is crazy. Completely crazy. He leaned down and kissed her again, soft and sweet and full of promise. Sweet dreams, Callie. As she walked upstairs on unsteady legs, Callie's mind raced. Everything had changed in the space of a single kiss, in the span of a conversation over grilled cheese sandwiches. What had started as a business arrangement was becoming something real, something that could break her heart or heal it completely. She paused at the top of the stairs and looked back. Nolan was still standing in the kitchen, watching her go, his hair messed up and his expression soft with something that looked like wonder. Tomorrow, she knew, they'd have to figure out what this meant for their arrangement, for the baby they were supposed to create, for the carefully controlled life he'd built. But tonight, she was going to fall asleep remembering the way he'd kissed her like she was his salvation. Some mornings arrive with coffee and clarity, others with coffee and complete chaos. Callie woke to sunshine streaming through her French doors and the sound of Nolan's voice drifting up from the garden below. She padded to the balcony, still in her pajamas, and found him on his phone, pacing the stone patio in running clothes. His hair was damp with sweat, and even from the second floor she could see the tension in his shoulders. No, Catherine, I don't think that's appropriate, he was saying, his voice carrying that controlled tone she'd heard him use in business calls. We've been over this. Catherine, his ex-fiancée. Callie's stomach dropped as she remembered their conversation from yesterday, but she couldn't make herself step away from the balcony. I'm not avoiding you. I'm simply not interested in revisiting old decisions. Nolan stopped pacing and looked up, spotting Callie on the balcony. Their eyes met, and something complicated passed between them. Acknowledgement, regret, and underneath it all, the memory of last night's kiss. I have to go, he said into the phone, never breaking eye contact with Callie. We'll talk later. 20 minutes later, Callie found him in the kitchen, showered and dressed in dark jeans and a gray Henley that made his eyes look almost silver. He was making coffee with the kind of focused intensity that suggested he was avoiding thinking about something else. Good morning, she said carefully. Morning. He handed her a mug, prepared exactly the way she liked it. Sleep well? The question felt loaded with subtext. They stood on opposite sides of the kitchen island, close enough to touch but maintaining careful distance, both acutely aware of the shift between them. About last night, Callie began. I'm sorry. The words came out in a rush. I crossed a line. This arrangement has specific parameters and I... Stop. She set down her mug and looked at him directly. Don't apologize for something we both wanted. Callie, was it a mistake? She moved around the island, closing the distance between them. The kiss, I mean, do you regret it? Nolan's jaw tightened, and she could see him waging some internal battle. What I regret is complicating something that was supposed to be straightforward. That's not what I asked. He stared at her for a long moment, his green eyes searching her face. No, he said finally. I don't regret it, but that doesn't mean it was wise. Since when do you do unwise things? Since you moved in here and started making grilled cheese sandwiches and asking me about my dreams. He ran a hand through his hair. A gesture she was learning meant he was struggling with control. Since you started looking at me like I'm someone worth knowing instead of just someone worth avoiding. The honesty in his admission made her breath catch. Nolan, I heard you talking to Catherine, she said instead, changing direction. This morning, is everything okay? His expression darkened. She wants to have lunch. Apparently she has something important to discuss. About what? I don't know, but Catherine doesn't do anything without an agenda. He leaned against the counter, studying Callie's face. She has a way of making things complicated. More complicated than this? Callie gestured between them. Different kind of complicated. Nolan's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with obvious reluctance. Speaking of which, I have a conference call in 10 minutes, but there's something we need to discuss first. Okay. The medical consultation. Doctor. Reyes wants to meet with both of us next week to discuss the process. Timeline, all the clinical details. He paused, and she could see him choosing his words carefully. Given what happened last night, I wanted to make sure you're still interested in proceeding. The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Callie realized this was her chance to back out, to say that things had gotten too complicated, that she couldn't separate business from emotion the way he'd assumed she could. Are you still interested? She asked instead. I don't know. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. A week ago, the answer would have been simple. Now I'm wondering if what we're talking about creating in a lab is something that should happen a different way. The word sent heat flooding through her body, because she knew exactly what he meant. The idea of carrying his child, of creating a life with him through passion instead of procedure, was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. That would change everything about our arrangement, she said quietly. Everything. He moved closer, near enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his eyes again. The timeline, the legal aspects, the emotional boundaries we agreed to maintain, the money. The money would be irrelevant. His voice was soft but certain. If we did this the natural way, it wouldn't be a transaction anymore. It would be a choice we made together. Callie felt her heart racing. And if it didn't work? If we tried and it didn't happen, or if we realized we'd made a mistake, then we'd figure it out together. He reached up to touch her face, the same gentle gesture from last night. But Callie, you need to understand, if we cross that line, there's no going back to what this was supposed to be. What was it supposed to be? Simple, clean, emotionally safe for both of us. And what would it become? Messy, complicated, real. His thumb traced her cheekbone. The kind of thing that could break your heart, or heal it, she whispered. Before he could respond, his phone rang with the conference call. He stepped back reluctantly, his hand falling away from her face. We don't have to decide anything today, he said. Think about it. Think about what you really want, not what you think you should want. After he disappeared into his study for the call, Callie wandered the house, trying to process the conversation. The logical part of her brain screamed that this was exactly the kind of complication she couldn't afford. She was homeless, broke, and emotionally vulnerable. Getting involved with Nolan beyond their original arrangement was asking for heartbreak, but the other part of her, the part that had felt something click into place when he kissed her, whispered that maybe some risks were worth taking. She found herself in the library, a room she hadn't explored yet. It was all dark wood and leather-bound books, with a window seat that looked out over the gardens. She curled up there with one of the novels he'd bought for her, but the words blurred together as her mind raced. An hour later, Nolan found her there. How did the call go? She asked. Fine. Boring market analysis. He sat on the edge of the window seat, close enough to touch but not quite touching. What are you reading? I'm not, really. Just thinking. About. She closed the book and looked at him. Really looked at him. The careful way he held himself, the slight tension around his eyes, the way his hands rested on his knees like he was forcing himself not to reach for her. About the fact that I've never wanted anything the way I want this, she said. About the fact that terrifies me. Which part? The baby? Or you? The word came out as barely a whisper. I want you, Nolan. Not the arrangement. Not the money, not the solution to my problems. You. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe, or recognition. Callie, I know it's crazy. I know it's not what we planned. But when you kissed me last night, it felt like coming home to a place I didn't know I was looking for. He was quiet for a long moment, and she could see him processing, weighing possibilities, trying to reconcile his careful control with the chaos of emotion. If we do this, he said finally, if we throw out the clinical approach and see what happens naturally, you need to know that I'm not good at relationships. I don't have a lot of practice with putting someone else's needs first. Neither do I. I've spent so long just trying to survive that I forgot how to live. We could mess this up spectacularly, or we could create something beautiful." He reached for her hand then, threading their fingers together. "The medical appointment is Thursday. We could tell Dr. Reyes we want to wait, see what happens on our own first. And the legal stuff, the contracts, we rip them up." His grip on her hand tightened. "We start over, with no predetermined outcomes, guys, no safety nets, no guarantees except that we'll be honest with each other." Callie felt something settle in her chest, a kind of peace she hadn't experienced in years. Yes, yes, yes. Let's throw out the contracts and see what happens when two people just choose each other. And as Nolan leaned over to kiss her again, soft and sweet and full of promise, Callie realized that sometimes the scariest decisions lead to the most beautiful destinations. Some women enter your life like sunshine, others like storm clouds that refuse to pass. The week that followed their decision felt like living in a beautiful dream. Callie and Nolan moved around each other with careful tenderness, sharing morning coffee and evening wine, talking late into the night about everything and nothing. He showed her his favorite hiking trails in the mountains, and she introduced him to the pleasure of reading poetry aloud. They held hands during movies and kissed like teenagers whenever the mood struck them. It was Friday evening when the dream began to crack. Callie was in the kitchen, humming while she made dinner, something she'd never imagined herself doing in a mansion, when she heard a car in the driveway. Through the window, she watched a sleek white BMW pull up to the front entrance with the kind of aggressive precision that suggested the driver was used to getting what she wanted. The woman who emerged was everything Callie had feared she would be. Tall, blonde, impeccably dressed in a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than Callie's former rent. Even from a distance, she moved with the confidence of someone who had never been told no, never been made to feel small or unworthy. Catherine Granger had arrived. "Nolan," her voice carried through the house with crisp authority. "I know you're here. We need to talk." Callie heard Nolan's study door open, heard his footsteps in the hallway. She stayed frozen in the kitchen, a wooden spoon clutched in her hand, listening to their voices carry from the foyer. "Catherine, I told you I was busy tonight. And I told you this couldn't wait." The sound of heels clicking on marble. "Whose car is that in your driveway? The little Honda that looks like it belongs in a junkyard?" Heat flooded Callie's cheeks. The Honda was hers, 12 years old, with a dent in the passenger door and duct tape holding the bumper together. She'd been embarrassed to park it next to Nolan's elegant vehicles, but he'd insisted it belonged there as much as anything else. "That's not your concern," Nolan said, his voice tight with warning. "Everything about you is my concern, darling, especially when you're making decisions that affect both our futures." Callie found herself moving toward the foyer, drawn by a combination of curiosity and dread. She stopped just out of sight, close enough to see Catherine's reflection in the hall mirror. She was beautiful in the way that money and breeding could create. Perfect skin, perfect hair, perfect teeth, in a smile that never quite reached her ice-blue eyes. Everything about her screamed privilege and control, from her designer handbag to the way she touched Nolan's arm like she still had the right. "I've been patient," Catherine was saying. "I've given you space to work through whatever quarter-life crisis this is. But people are starting to talk, Nolan. About you, about us, about the fact that you're living here like a hermit instead of taking your rightful place in society. Catherine, I know you think what we had wasn't enough, but we can fix that. We can try again. Do it differently this time." Her voice softened, becoming almost pleading. "We make sense together. We always have." "We made sense on paper," Nolan said quietly. "That's not the same thing. And what does make sense? Hiding away in this mausoleum, pretending you don't have responsibilities." Catherine's tone sharpened again. "Your grandfather would be ashamed. Leave my grandfather out of this. He left you that inheritance because he trusted you to carry on the family legacy, not to throw it away on some midlife rebellion." Catherine moved closer to him, and Callie could see her reflection reaching up to touch his face. "Come back to me, Nolan. Come back to the life you were meant to live." The silence stretched so long that Callie felt her heart stop beating. Was he considering it? Was he remembering all the reasons Catherine made sense? All the ways Callie didn't fit into his world? "There's someone else," Nolan said finally. Catherine's hand dropped like she'd been slapped. "Excuse me? I'm seeing someone. It's serious." "Who?" The single word cracked like a whip. Who could possibly be more suitable than... Suitable has nothing to do with it. Of course it does. Nolan, You can't just choose someone because she makes you feel good for 5 minutes. Marriage, relationships, they're about building something together, about complementing each other's strengths. Marriage? Nolan's voice was dangerously quiet. Who said anything about marriage? Don't be naive. Every relationship at our level is about marriage, about creating the right kind of partnership. Catherine's laugh was brittle and cold. Unless this is just some meaningless fling with someone inappropriate, in which case you can get it out of your system and we can… Catherine, stop. But she was on a roll now, her voice rising with each word. Let me guess. Some little waitress or shop girl who thinks she's won the lottery. Someone who doesn't understand that relationships like ours aren't about feelings. They're about building empires. That's enough. Is she even educated? Does she come from a good family? Can she hold a conversation at a bored dinner? Or does she just look pretty on your arm while you slum it? The words hit Callie like physical blows. Shop girl, uneducated, pretty decoration. Every insecurity she'd ever had about her place in Nolan's world came rushing back, magnified by Catherine's perfectly manicured cruelty. Catherine, I want you to leave. Now. I'm not leaving until you explain to me how you could throw away everything we built for some nobody who… Her name is Callie. The new voice in the conversation was her own. Callie stepped into the foyer, her chin raised despite the trembling in her hands. And I can hold my own conversation. Thank you very much. Catherine turned, and Callie got her first full look at the woman who had once been engaged to the man she was falling in love with. Up close, Catherine was even more intimidating. Tall where Callie was average height. Polished where Callie felt perpetually rumpled. Commanding where Callie had always been the one who apologized for taking up space. Well, Catherine said, looking Callie up and down with obvious disdain. This is unexpected. Callie became acutely aware of her simple jeans and sweater, her long black hair pulled back in a messy bun, her complete lack of designer anything. Next to Catherine's perfection, she felt like exactly what Catherine had called her, a nobody trying to play in a world that didn't want her. Callie, you don't have to. Nolan started. Yes, I do. Callie moved to stand beside him, fighting every instinct that told her to hide. Catherine, is it? I've heard about you. I'm sure you have. Catherine's smile was sharp as glass. And you are? I'm the woman Nolan chose. The words hung in the elegant foyer like a challenge. Catherine's perfect composure cracked slightly, revealing something ugly underneath. Chose for what? Exactly. A fun little distraction while he figures out what he really wants. Catherine? Nolan's voice carried a warning that made the air crackle with tension. No, it's fine, Callie said, though her heart was racing. She has a right to know where things stand. And where do they stand? Catherine asked, her ice blue eyes fixed on Callie like a predator sizing up prey. Callie felt Nolan tense beside her, felt the weight of the moment pressing down on all of them. This was it, the moment where she either claimed her place in his life or admitted she didn't belong there. They stand exactly where they should, she said quietly, with two people who choose each other every day, not because it makes sense on paper, but because it makes sense in here. She pressed her hand to her heart. Catherine's laugh was like breaking crystal. How absolutely precious. Young love and all that romantic nonsense. She turned to Nolan, her expression shifting to something that might have been pity. When you're tired of playing house with your little project, call me. I'll still be here. Nolan, I'll always be here. Because unlike some people, I understand what you really need. She swept toward the door, then paused, looking back at Callie with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Enjoy it while it lasts, dear. Men like Nolan always come back to their own kind eventually. The front door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than a slam. In the sudden silence, Callie became aware that she was shaking, that her hands were clenched into fists, that she felt simultaneously furious and heartbroken. Callie, is she right? The question came out barely above a whisper. What? Is she right? About you coming back to your own kind. Callie turned to face him, and she saw her own turmoil reflected in his green eyes. Because standing here next to her, I can see what she means. I can see how perfect you two look together, how much sense you made. Callie, no. Nolan reached for her, but she stepped back. She's everything I'm not. Sophisticated, educated, from the right family. She fits into your world in ways I never will. I don't want her world, don't you? Callie's voice was growing stronger but also more desperate. Don't you miss having someone who understands board dinners and charity galas and whatever other things people like you do? Someone who doesn't have to be taught how to fit in? Nolan stared at her for a long moment, and in his silence, Callie felt something inside her chest begin to crack, because the worst part wasn't that Catherine was wrong about them. It was that she might be right. Sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones that determine everything that comes after. Nolan stood in the marble foyer for what felt like an eternity after Callie's question hung between them, the ghost of Catherine's presence still poisoning the air. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, with something that sounded like pain. "Come with me." He led her to his study, past the mahogany desk and leather chairs to a wall she'd never really examined before. With careful movements, he pulled down a thick photo album and set it on the coffee table between them. "This is what Catherine's world looks like," he said, opening to the first page. The photographs were like glimpses into a life Callie had only seen in magazines. Charity galas where everyone looked like they'd stepped off movie sets. Board dinners in restaurants that probably had year-long waiting lists. Polo matches and wine tastings and elegant parties where the flower arrangements cost more than most people's monthly salary. And there was Nolan, in every photo, looking handsome and polished and absolutely miserable. "See?" he said, pointing to a picture of himself in a tuxedo, standing beside Catherine at some formal event. Perfect couple. Right families, right educations, right everything. Callie studied the photo. Nolan's smile was practiced, empty. Catherine's hand was on his arm in a possessive gesture that suggested ownership rather than affection. They looked like they belonged together in the way that matched furniture belonged together. Coordinated, appropriate, and completely soulless. "You look dead inside?" Nolan turned the page, revealing more of the same. "Because for 2 years, I went through the motions of being the person everyone expected me to be. I attended the right events, said the right things, dated the right woman. But you proposed to her." "I proposed because it was what I was supposed to do. Because my parents approved, because it made strategic sense, because I thought that's what love was supposed to feel like." He closed the album with more force than necessary. "I thought love was supposed to be comfortable and predictable and safe." Callie sank into the leather chair across from him, her mind reeling. "And now I know the difference between settling for someone and choosing someone." He leaned forward, his green eyes intense. "Callie, when Catherine was here, talking about suitability and appropriateness and building empires, all I could think about was this morning. Do you remember this morning?" She nodded, though her throat felt tight. "You were making pancakes and dancing to that Taylor Swift song, and you had flour in your hair and you were singing off-key, and I thought—" He paused, running his hands through his hair. "I thought I'd never seen anything more beautiful in my life. Nolan, that's not appropriate behavior for a CEO's wife. Dancing in the kitchen, singing off-key, getting flour everywhere." His voice grew stronger, more certain. "It's real. It's you. It's everything I didn't know I was missing." Callie felt tears threatening, but she wasn't sure if they were from relief or heartbreak. "But she's not wrong about the practical things. I don't know how to be the woman on your arm at those events. I don't know which fork to use or how to make small talk about things I've never experienced. Do you want to learn?" The question caught her off guard. "What? If I taught you, if we figured it out together, would you want to be that woman? Not because you have to change who you are, but because you want to be part of my whole life." Callie stood up, needing to pace. She walked to his window, looking out at the gardens where they'd shared so many quiet conversations over the past week. "I don't know if I can be both people, the woman who dances in your kitchen and the woman who stands beside you at board dinners. Why do they have to be different people?" "Because," she struggled to find the words, "because what if I embarrass you? What if I say the wrong thing or wear the wrong dress or don't understand some reference that everyone else gets?" Nolan was quiet for so long that she turned around to look at him. He was studying her with an expression she couldn't read. "Can I tell you something about the night I proposed to Catherine?" Callie nodded. "We were at the symphony, some fundraiser for something I can't even remember now. Catherine was perfect. The right dress, the right conversation, the right reactions to everything." He stood and moved toward her, and I was bored out of my mind. I spent the entire evening watching other couples, wondering if any of them actually enjoyed each other's company or if they were all just playing their parts. That doesn't sound romantic. It wasn't, but I thought that's what adult relationships were supposed to be. Practical partnerships between compatible people. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his eyes. Then I met you, and I ruined your practical worldview. You showed me what it feels like to want to rush home from work, to look forward to quiet evenings and Sunday mornings and conversations that last until midnight. His hands came up to frame her face. You showed me the difference between being with someone who fits and being with someone who feels like home. Callie closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. What if Catherine's right, though? What if this feeling doesn't last? What if 6 months from now you realize you miss having someone who understands your world? Then we'll deal with it then. His thumbs brushed away tears she didn't realize had started falling. But Callie, I need you to understand something. I'm not asking you to change. I'm asking you to trust that who you are is exactly who I want, even if I never fit perfectly into your world. Especially then. He leaned his forehead against hers. Because maybe it's my world that needs to change, not you. The words hung between them, heavy with possibility and promise. Callie felt something shift inside her chest. Not quite peace, but the beginning of it. There's something else we need to talk about, she said quietly. The baby. The baby. She pulled back to look at him directly. Before Catherine showed up, we were building something beautiful. But now I wonder if bringing a child into this uncertainty is fair to anyone. Nolan was quiet for a moment, processing. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe we should take that off the table for now. Maybe we should figure out who we are together before we try to create a life together. And the inheritance? The legal requirements? There has to be another way. Some other clause in the will. Some other option. She took his hands in hers. I don't want our child to be born because you needed an heir. I want them to be born because we chose to create a family together. Something in Nolan's expression softened. You said our child. Did I? She felt heat rise in her cheeks. I guess I did. And our family. I'm getting ahead of myself. Are you? He squeezed her hands. Because it sounds like you're thinking about a future with me. I'm thinking about a lot of things. She managed a small smile. Including the fact that if we're going to do this, if we're going to try to build something real, we need to do it right. What does right look like? It looks like dating. Like getting to know each other without contracts and medical appointments and inheritance clauses hanging over our heads. She paused, gathering courage. It looks like you taking me to one of those fancy events and letting me prove to myself that I can handle your world. Callie, and it looks like you coming to meet my parents in Colorado Springs and letting them prove to you that my world is worth understanding too. Nolan stared at her, and slowly a smile spread across his face. You want to introduce me to your parents? Eventually. If we get that far. She bit her lip. Is that crazy? It's terrifying, he said honestly. And wonderful. And exactly what I want. So we start over. No contracts. No medical procedures. Just us. Just us. He pulled her closer, until she was standing between his arms. But Callie, yeah, I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me you won't let Catherine's words live in your head rent-free. Promise me that when you start doubting whether you belong here, you'll talk to me instead of making decisions based on fear. Callie looked into his green eyes and saw something she'd never had before. Someone who wanted to fight for her, who wanted to help her fight for herself. I promise, she whispered. And as he leaned down to kiss her, soft and sweet and full of new beginnings, Callie realized that maybe the most beautiful love stories weren't the ones that made perfect sense. Maybe they were the ones where two imperfect people chose to make sense together. Sometimes love doesn't announce itself with grand gestures. Sometimes it whispers in the quiet moments when two hearts finally understand their home. 3 weeks had passed since their decision to start over, and Callie felt like she was learning to breathe in a completely new way. They were taking things slowly, morning coffee conversations, evening walks through the gardens, stolen kisses that felt both innocent and earth-shattering. Nolan was teaching her about his business world through quiet explanations over dinner, while she was showing him the simple pleasures he'd forgotten, reading poetry aloud, dancing to old songs, the joy of grocery shopping together on Saturday mornings. Tonight was different, though. Tonight was their first real test. The Denver Business Alliance Gala was exactly the kind of event Catherine had been talking about. 500 of the city's most influential people gathered in the ballroom of the Brown Palace Hotel for an evening of networking disguised as charity. Nolan had asked Callie to be his date 3 days ago, his green eyes serious as he explained what it would mean. It's not just dinner and dancing, he'd warned her. It's the official introduction of you to my world. After tonight, everyone will know about us. Now, standing in front of the mirror in her bedroom, Callie hardly recognized herself. The dress Nolan had insisted on buying her was midnight blue silk that hugged her curves and fell to just below her knees. Her long black hair was swept up in an elegant chignon that a professional stylist had created that afternoon, and she wore pearl earrings that had belonged to Nolan's grandmother. "Oh, you look perfect," Nolan said from the doorway, his voice soft with wonder. Callie turned to find him in a black tuxedo that made him look like something out of a magazine, but it was the expression on his face that took her breath away. Not just desire, but pride and something deeper that made her chest tight with emotion. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Good. That means it matters to you." He crossed the room and took her hands. "I remember what we talked about. Be myself. Ask questions when I don't understand something. And if anyone makes me feel small, find you immediately. And remember that you chose me for a reason." He smiled and kissed her forehead gently. "Ready?" The Brown Palace ballroom was everything Callie had expected and more. Crystal chandeliers, golden walls, tables set with more silverware than she'd ever seen in one place. The women glittered like jewels in their designer gowns, while the men looked uniformly elegant in their tuxedos. Conversations buzzed with the kind of casual references to exotic vacations and business deals that made Callie feel like she was visiting a foreign country in Nolan. A distinguished older man approached them with a warm smile. "Good to see you. And this must be the mysterious woman we've all been hearing about. Richard Morrison. Meet Callie Monroe," Nolan said smoothly, his hand warm and steady on her lower back. "Callie, Richard sits on the board of 3 companies I've invested in." "It's lovely to meet you," Callie said, grateful that her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "The pleasure is mine. Nolan's been keeping you well hidden. We were starting to think you were a figment of his imagination." For the next hour, Nolan guided her through the social minefield with patient grace. He introduced her to business partners, charitable board members, and old family friends, always with his hand on her back or her arm, a constant reminder that she belonged there because he wanted her there. Callie found herself relaxing as the evening progressed. The conversations weren't as intimidating as she'd feared. Most people were genuinely curious about her background in literature, and several asked thoughtful questions about her work at the local library. She even found herself laughing at a story told by the mayor's wife about a disastrous fundraising event the previous year. Then Catherine arrived. Callie spotted her across the ballroom before Nolan did, a vision in cream-colored silk, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her smile bright and predatory as she worked the room. She moved like a queen among her subjects, air-kissing and laughing at all the right moments. But her ice-blue eyes kept finding Callie across the crowd. "She's here," Callie murmured to Nolan during a brief lull in conversation. He followed her gaze and his jaw tightened slightly. "Are you okay?" "I think so. She looks—" Callie searched for the right word. "Determined. Catherine always looks determined. The question is what she's determined to do." They didn't have to wait long to find out. During the dinner service, Catherine approached their table with the confidence of someone who owned the room. "Nolan, darling," she said, bending to air-kiss his cheek. "You look wonderful. And Callie, isn't it? What a lovely dress." "Thank you," Callie replied carefully. "I was just telling the Hutchinsons about you," Catherine continued, her smile never wavering. They were so curious about Nolan's new friend. The pause before friend was deliberate, calculated to sting. But instead of shrinking back, Callie felt something inside her straighten. "I hope you told them good things," she said evenly. "Oh, of course. I mentioned how refreshing it must be for Nolan to date someone so uncomplicated." Catherine's eyes glittered with malice. "Someone without all the messy family expectations and social obligations that come with our usual crowd." "Catherine," Nolan's voice carried a warning. "What? I'm being complimentary. There's something to be said for simplicity." Catherine turned her attention back to Callie. "Tell me, dear, what do you think of all this? The gala, the charity work, the responsibility that comes with this level of influence." Callie felt the attention of their entire table focusing on her. This was the test, she realized. Catherine was trying to expose her as an outsider, someone who didn't understand or appreciate the world she'd stepped into. "I think," Callie said slowly, her voice growing stronger with each word, "that having the resources to help others is a privilege that should never be taken for granted. And I think that whether someone grew up in this world or found their way into it later, what matters is what they choose to do with the opportunities they're given." She paused, meeting Catherine's gaze directly. I also think that love, real love, isn't about finding someone who fits perfectly into your existing life. It's about finding someone who makes you want to build a better life together. The table was completely silent. Catherine's perfect smile had frozen in place, and Callie could see the calculation behind her eyes as she tried to formulate a response. How idealistic, Catherine said finally. How honest, corrected Mrs. Hutchinson, an elegant woman in her 70s who'd been listening with obvious interest. I like her, Nolan. She has spine. The conversation moved on, but Callie felt a shift in the energy around their table. She'd passed some kind of test, not Catherine's test, but her own. She'd spoken her truth with grace and conviction, and the world hadn't ended. Later, as they swayed together on the dance floor to a jazz quartet playing The Way You Look Tonight, Nolan pulled her closer. I'm proud of you, he murmured against her ear. For what? For being exactly who you are. For not letting Catherine make you small. He pulled back to look at her face. For showing everyone in this room what I see when I look at you. And what's that? Strength, intelligence, grace under pressure. His hand tightened on her waist. The woman I want to spend my life with. The words made Callie's heart skip. But before she could respond, the music shifted to something slower, more intimate. Other couples pressed closer together, lost in their own private moments within the public space. Nolan, Callie said softly. I love you. The words slipped out before she could stop them, honest and unguarded and terrifying in their simplicity. Nolan stopped dancing entirely, his green eyes searching her face. Say that again. I love you. This time she said it with certainty, with joy, with the kind of fearless honesty that had gotten her through Catherine's test. I love your terrible morning hair and the way you hum when you cook. I love how you listen to jazz to organize your thoughts and how you make me feel like I'm worth choosing every single day. Callie, I love that you're teaching me about wine and letting me teach you about poetry. I love that you hold my hand during movies and that you bought me books before you even knew if I'd stay. She reached up to touch his face. I love who I am when I'm with you. Nolan's response was to kiss her, right there in the middle of the dance floor, with half of Denver's elite watching. It was the kind of kiss that made declarations, that claimed and cherished and promised all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you too, he whispered. I love you so much it scares me. I love you enough to want to deserve you. You already do. Callie? Yeah? Let's go home. They left the gala early, driving through the quiet Denver streets with their hands clasped together and the windows down, letting the mountain air wash over them. When they reached the house, Nolan walked her to her bedroom door like he had every night for the past 3 weeks. But tonight, when he kissed her goodnight, Callie didn't let him pull away. Stay, she whispered against his lips. Callie, are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. And as he lifted her into his arms and carried her across the threshold of what had been her guest room, but was now simply the place where they chose each other completely, Callie knew that this was how love was supposed to feel, not like settling or compromising or making do, but like coming home to the person you were always meant to find. Sometimes the most beautiful endings are actually beginnings in disguise. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows of the house in Cherry Creek, casting golden patterns across the marble countertops where Callie sat with her laptop, a cup of coffee growing cold beside her. Her long black hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore one of Nolan's old button-down shirts over leggings, the uniform of a woman who worked from home and didn't apologize for being comfortable. On her screen was the final page of her manuscript, a novel about a young woman who discovers that sometimes the most unexpected opportunities lead to the most extraordinary love. She'd started writing it 6 months after the gala, when Nolan had converted the unused conservatory into a bright, book-filled office space, and told her it was time to stop talking about her dreams and start living them. How's the book coming? Nolan's voice came from behind her, followed by the familiar warmth of his hands on her shoulders. I just typed, the end. She leaned back against him, still amazed by how natural this felt. Morning conversations, shared spaces, the easy intimacy of two people who'd learned to build a life together. Cassidy's going to read it first. Then we'll see if anyone else wants to publish a story about a fake pregnancy arrangement that turns into real love. They will. He kissed the top of her head, then moved to pour himself coffee from the pot she'd made earlier. Oh, want to celebrate? We could drive up to Vail for the weekend? Actually, I have a better idea. Callie saved her document and closed the laptop. turning to face him fully. Let's go to Colorado Springs. I want to show my parents the ring. Nolan nearly dropped his coffee mug. Ring. Callie held up her left hand, where a simple solitaire diamond caught the morning light. The one you hid in my coffee cup this morning while I was in the shower. I was planning to do that more romantically, he said, though his smile was wide and unrepentant. Maybe tonight, with wine and candles and a speech about how you changed my entire life. You can still give the speech. She stood and moved toward him, noting how his eyes immediately softened when she got close. But Nolan, I don't need candles and wine to know that I want to marry you. I've known that since the night of the gala. Have you now? She reached up to straighten his tie, a gesture that had become automatic over the past 2 years. I've also known that you've been carrying that ring around for 3 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. How did you? Thomas told me. Apparently you've been asking his advice about proposal locations. She laughed at his expression. For a CEO, you're terrible at keeping secrets from people who love you. And do you? Love me enough to marry me, even though I'm apparently an obvious conspiracy? Instead of answering with words, Callie kissed him. The kind of kiss that still made her stomach flip after 2 years. The kind that tasted like coffee and promises and the particular brand of happiness that came from choosing the right person. Is that a yes? He asked against her lips. That's a yes, obviously. And also we need to call my parents before Cassidy spills the beans at the hospital. 3 hours later, they were driving through the mountain passes toward Colorado Springs in Nolan's car, the radio playing softly while they held hands over the center console. Callie had traded his shirt for a sundress, and Nolan had swapped his business clothes for jeans and a sweater that made his green eyes look almost silver. Nervous? She asked as they passed the exit for her hometown. Terrified, he admitted. Your father still looks at me like he's deciding whether I'm good enough for his daughter. You're not, Callie said cheerfully. Nobody would be, but you love me enough to try to be, and that's what matters to him. They pulled into the driveway of the small house where Callie had grown up, with its carefully tended garden and the porch swing where she'd spent countless summer evenings reading. Before they could even get out of the car, the front door opened and both her parents appeared, her mother wiping her hands on a dish towel, her father trying to look stern but failing to hide his smile. Oh no, there's our girl, her mother said, pulling Callie into the kind of hug that erased 2 years of distance in an instant. And there's our future son-in-law, Nolan. You look well. Thank you, Mrs. Monroe. You both do. Nolan accepted her father's firm handshake and her mother's enthusiastic hug with the grace he'd learned during previous visits. Let me see it, her mother demanded immediately, reaching for Callie's hand. Oh, honey, it's beautiful. Simple and classic, just like you. How did you know? Callie asked, laughing. Because this one called us last week asking for permission, her father said, nodding toward Nolan, like we were going to say no to the man who makes our daughter glow like a Christmas tree every time she talks about him. That evening, they sat on the front porch as the sun set behind the mountains, drinking her father's famous sweet tea and listening to her parents tell embarrassing stories about Callie's childhood. Nolan fit into the comfortable chaos of her family's conversations like he'd been born to it, asking the right questions and laughing at the right moments and looking at Callie like she was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. So when's the wedding? Her mother asked as they prepared to leave the next morning. We haven't talked about that yet, Callie said. Soon, though. We don't want to wait. Good, her father said, surprising everyone. Life's too short to spend it waiting for perfect timing. You two have found something real. Don't let anyone convince you to delay happiness. The drive back to Denver was quiet and comfortable, both of them processing the weekend, the engagement, the way her parents had welcomed Nolan into their family without reservation. Your father's right, you know, Nolan said as they pulled into their driveway. About not waiting. What are you thinking? I'm thinking Christmas would be perfect. Just family. Nothing fancy. Maybe in the conservatory, with Cassidy as your maid of honor and Thomas officiating. Thomas isn't ordained. He could be by Christmas, Callie laughed, the sound echoing in the quiet car. Are you serious? I'm serious about marrying you as soon as possible. I'm serious about starting our family when we're ready. I'm serious about spending the next 50 years proving that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as business arrangements. And I'm serious about loving you exactly as much in 50 years as I do right now, Callie said softly. As they walked into their house, their home, Callie felt the deep satisfaction of a story coming full circle. 2 years ago, she'd been a broke, desperate young woman willing to consider anything to survive. Now she was a published author, well, almost, an engaged woman, and someone who'd learned that the most beautiful love stories weren't the ones that made perfect sense from the beginning. They were the ones where two people chose to make sense together, every single day. That night, as they lay in bed with her engagement ring catching the moonlight and his arms wrapped around her, Nolan whispered the question that had started it all. "Any regrets?" "Just one," Callie murmured against his chest. "What's that?" "I regret that it took me so long to realize that home isn't a place. It's a person." She tilted her head up to look at him. "And I found mine. And in the quiet of their bedroom, surrounded by the life they'd built together and the promises they'd made, Callie knew that some contracts were made to be broken, especially when they led to something infinitely more valuable than either party had ever dared to hope for. Love, in all its messy, complicated, absolutely perfect glory. After following Callie and Nolan's journey from a desperate business arrangement to true love, we're left with the beautiful truth that sometimes life gives us exactly what we need, in the most unexpected packaging. What did this story teach you about taking chances on love, even when it doesn't look like what you expected? Would you have had the courage to trust your heart the way Callie did? Or would you have played it safe like Catherine wanted Nolan to do? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below, letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.